when that light bulb goes on and a student recognizes, I have this power, I have this voice, and if we can model that adults will listen, that's some of the most beautiful feedback that we get as a system, and it has helped us to grow and change. But you have to create those spaces, and you have to be intentional about it.
Alan, welcome to Unmute the Voices. How are you?
I'm great. It's exciting to be here.
I'm glad to have you here. I know that you're not accustomed to being on video because you have your own podcast, which is more audio. So I appreciate you having the guts to come on this one.
Yeah, I might have a face for radio, but we'll try it out.
Most people don't know this. Well, first off, you're a superintendent. You've been with the Auburn School District for 10 years as their superintendent. But people don't know that you actually started your career as a music teacher. You went to the Eastman School of Music. You married a musician. Your wife's a professional musician. You've just done all of this stuff in music education. And of course, still being an administrator. I'm curious, with everything that you have learned, if you had to go back into the classroom today and teach music, what would you do differently that you hadn't done before?
That's a great question. And so my background in music is a big part of who I am. And I joke that I feel shame because I don't play anymore. I live vicariously through my wife, Shannon, who's a professional oboist. My son played violin through all the youth symphony time, but it's still a big part of who I am. And I think a lot of the skills that I bring to my current role as a superintendent, my comfort in front of an audience and dealing with, productions and all of the things that you do as a musician really kind of plays into who I am. I often think, gosh, what would it be like to go back into the classroom and lead a band? And it would be fun. Honestly, it's been humbling seeing our music teachers in the Auburn School District who have surpassed so many things that I've done. As a person who pursued music very seriously into my mid-20s and taught for 4 years, these are professionals who have devoted their life to music education. And so the first thing I would do is learn from them a lot. And then I think about, most of what I learned to do, I learned from my high school band director. I learned from a great music education professor, Richard Grunow at Eastman School of Music. Those are great experiences. I don't know that they prepare me to do what we do in classrooms today. And Auburn School District's on a journey towards equity and excellence, and being a great school district for all of our students. Auburn has changed and grown as a community tremendously. We are now 71% students of color, and I could teach in a way that would have represented my generation and my culture, and it would be missing a lot. And so I have learned kind of vicariously through some of our music teachers. We have a teacher at Olympic Middle School, one of the most diverse middle schools in the state, predominantly Latino, wrote grants for Latin jazz band music. Had a whole library of the music that I grew up playing in jazz band. And the kids did fine with it, but man, it just, to incorporate that culture is a game changer. I think of what Megan Wagner does at Auburn Riverside High School, phenomenal high school band director, has dedicated a significant amount of her professional study to what we might call non-traditional composers. So female composers, composers of color, a lot of really high quality contemporary stuff. So I would have a lot of learning to do. I have the Sousa band rep down. I don't think anybody's going to beat me at that, but I'd have a lot of learning to do. so that our schools and our music classes would reflect our community today.
I really love to hear that, because that's one thing that we do here at Unmute the Voices is we celebrate and highlight the music of women composers as well as people of color who are both composers and performers. How do you feel that students learning that repertoire specifically ties into the mission and values of the Auburn School District?
Yeah, that's a great question. We adopted a strategic plan, which I'm contractually bound to mention because I'm a superintendent.
Yeah.
That's what we do. And the beautiful thing is we never once said, okay, we had a group of 60 community members and teachers, staff, leaders in the district. We never once had to say, okay, now we're going to talk about how we incorporate equity, and our community is there. They're ahead of us. They're demanding it. And we adopted a vision statement that each student will have an educational experience in which they are seen and valued for who they are today, while developing their fullest academic and social potential to be prepared for the future they choose. And each of those words is really intentional about thinking about the experience of going to school, right? Most of us have our corner of the building. We teach our subject. We're in the principal's office, thinking about what it's like for a student to get off the bus and go through a day in our schools, and how's that experience relevant? Thinking about how do we see and value students for who they are today, and not with the expectation of, I'm expecting this person to conform to our school culture. Yes, there are rules, there's accountability, right?
Sure.
It's a school, but how do we change that paradigm from, you need to assimilate and you need to maybe leave some of those cultural pieces that are part of who you are behind and outside and do school, versus how do we see kids for who they are and create an environment where students and frankly our staff feel comfortable being able to bring their whole self, their culture authentically as a part of our school. And so some of those concepts really go right into how we offer our arts programs, how we teach and engage students. Are we relevant in a student's life in our community today, or are we sustaining a practice that might have worked for my generation and people like me in a time where the world has moved on, and it's a beautiful place and there's all kinds of potential, and we need to change with it and in some cases catch up.
So I'm just curious, if I'm thinking of this and I'm listening to your comments from a parent perspective, right? We hear that there's a strategic plan, you have a mission, you have vision statements that are aligned with the activities that go on every day at a school or in a classroom. How are you able to properly assess that these things are happening? From a parent perspective, how do they know that it's happening, and how do you know that your assessment is working?
That's a really great question. Our cabinet has a coach, and probably her number one feedback is how are you measuring this? How do you know? How are you tracking your progress? How can you both to improve and to be able to demonstrate, actually we're getting some bang for the buck for the things that we aspire to do in the strategic plan. And what's hard is, I think education, probably like a lot of areas, tends to fall for the things that are easiest measured, which can be reductive, right? And some of the, not that standardized tests don't have a place, but that's a convenient source of data that really doesn't illuminate some of the things that I'm talking about and the student's overall experience, right? And I'm trying to avoid, whole child has kind of become a buzzword, but it's really thinking about the cultural enrichment that comes from the arts, that the development that's a part of being in a sports team, the importance of career and technical education. We have to look for expansive ways to measure those things. So actually we're going through a process right now in our cabinet where we're finding other ways to measure growth and belonging, so that it's really not only literacy's primary, I believe, in education. Everybody needs to learn how to read well. But if we're only looking at that test score, and we're not looking at all these other
The
things,
holistic,
we're not developing
experience.
a really well-rounded adult for their future.
So let's say a parent is watching this show with you on it, and they live in New Jersey, and the parent has their job has been transferred to the Seattle area, and they have family in Auburn, and they decide to move in with that family, or they decide that they just want to live in the Auburn School District, and they're going to send their kids to the Auburn School District. What's your pitch to have that family have their kids in the Auburn School District versus going to another school district or going to a private school?
First of all, there are a lot of great schools and great school districts doing good work. I think what we're proud of in Auburn is there's a saying that Auburn's a big, small town. And the Auburn School District actually covers 100,000 residents and about 17,000 to 18,000 students. But there's a sense of cohesiveness and pride. There's a rich history, but then there's a vibrant now. And if you want to bring your child to a place where we're going to look like the world that your children are going to live in, and you think of a kindergartner now is going to work to 2070, 2080, and you think about the demographic trends in our country and what it's going to be like to be successful in a truly diverse community wherever you are in America. You get that right now in Auburn. So we pursue excellence, but we do it in a way that is inclusive and promotes a sense of belonging for all of our students and all of our families. That's what we aspire to. And I'd say the other, to be real, is we're not there. And we know that, and we are humble about that. And I would be willing to bet you're not going to find any school that's arrived or is perfect. But those are, the ideals and the goals that we hold ourselves to and that we work towards every day.
No, I appreciate that, because I think of families who move in to a school district, and they move in, obviously they look at the ranking of the school, but there's other things like sports or arts or specific STEM programs, et cetera, that they're interested in having their kids in, along with just the cultural awareness. And I think that's really important to families, especially those families who are looking for rich cultural experiences for their kids. Classical music and music education has been traditionally frowned upon because it's so, in a lot of ways, exclusive, right? There's a large emphasis on class and divide, in the sense of not everyone having access to high quality music instruction, or people of color not having access to attend concerts or take lessons, etc. If you had a magic wand and could change the landscape of what music education or classical music very broadly looks like, what would you do to get the average person who might be interested in going to a Drake concert or a Kendrick Lamar concert into being more interested in classical music or music education? What would you do if I gave you, Alan, the magic wand to make it happen?
Yeah.
What's your vision?
That's not a world that I live in, because schools, I think, are engineered to resist change and to be stable. And we want that, right? Nobody wants their high school or their college to go out of business their junior year. Um, and there's some real benefit to that stability. Um, but it resists change and it resists growth. And I'm really proud of our teachers who have found ways to, to enable access. One of the things we've done is picked up Music for Life, which takes donated instruments, gently used instruments, refurbishes them through one of the music repair shops, and provides them. So we've removed that barrier for students who may not have had access to an instrument. That's a big deal, right?
Yeah.
That in itself removes a barrier for a student. I think what I'm learning is I recently stopped wearing ties. I always wore ties. I thought that's what you're supposed to do. And some of our folks who help us connect with the community say, you're intimidating enough already. They call you Dr. Spicciati. You're the superintendent of schools. You have 2,500 employees. It's intimidating. Some of our families maybe haven't had the best experience themselves in their school, parents and so forth. And so taking that tie off has helped to relate and just to be a little bit more approachable. And I offer that as a metaphor for what classical music needs to do, right? And I did not grow up wealthy, but I actually owned a tuxedo in high school because I performed with an orchestra that wore tuxes. A little community orchestra that played in a small college in my town. And that's what I learned that classical music was. And then I wore the tuxes in my music school. And even now, the symphony will make some efforts to do outreach concerts, and they'll do untuxed. But I think the more that we can meet people where they are, you see that one of the, politics gets knocked. But one of the things that politicians do well is they will meet people where they are because you have to, or you're not going to engage them. So you see candidates, going on Howard Stern or going on female podcasts or whatever it is to reach people. And I think as musicians, we kind of need to humble ourselves and realize, this is a dying business if we're not evolving and being accessible and being humble and being willing to try things. And one of my wonderings is all of our music teachers were trained similar to how I was. And you have these structures of the orchestra and the wind ensemble or concert band and the jazz band. And if we were starting a school today, and I think this is really what you're asking me, would you build it around rap and hip hop and, different cultures, international music, all of the things that kids listen to and families listen to? I think that there's really room for that. We've done some, mariachi and other things that are engaging in cultures, but then somebody said that's like doing old country music and saying you're going to reach the country crowd that maybe your grandfather listened to versus contemporary today. So I think we just really need to humble ourselves. We need to ask students and families. That's the other part, that the better I get as a leader, the more I realize I need students. We formed a superintendent student advisory, and at lunchtime we decided, okay, we're going to play some music. And so our communications director is playing her playlist, and there was the oh my gosh, what did we play? It wasn't Red Hot Chili Peppers, but it might as well have been. It was one of these bands that I'm like, okay, that's cool, that's contemporary, and we ask, hey, how many of you like this group? No hands go up. Then one hand goes up, and it's this really sweet young lady who says, yeah, and she's basically throwing us a lifeline. She said, yeah, I like the oldies. And I was like, oh my goodness, this is why we need to listen to kids. Even if I've been around, I had teenagers in the house at this very time. We're not kids, and we're not of that generation.
Yeah.
And even if we were, it would be one perspective. And as I mentioned, we have so many different communities and perspectives and tastes in music. So we need to be humble and we need to be expansive in our thinking, so that there's nothing wrong with Percy Granger and Lincoln Sharp Pony, but it's a different age and we need to stay relevant.
Yeah. Unmute the Voices is sponsored by Key to Change Studio. Key to Change Studio is a violin and viola studio located in Renton, Washington, which allows middle and high school underserved students living in South King County an opportunity to take violin or viola lessons. For more information, visit their website at keytochangestudio.org. Now, back to Unmute the Voices. So what I hear you saying is that as adults, we need to give students the license to have more of a voice. Would you agree?
100%.
Yeah.
And we're not good at that. That's hard for us.
So
but we need it.
What sort of things can we as adults do, especially adults whose job is to serve the underserved, which is, as you mentioned earlier, majority in your school district, 71% students of color, right? What can we as adults do to give license for students to have more of a voice and to feel free to express themselves around adults who have the authority? That's hard.
Yeah, no, but
right?
it's exactly the right question. And as I mentioned, it goes against what we experience as students and the ways schools are structured. We have a program in Auburn called YES, and it stands for Youth Equity Stewardship. And it really is exactly what you said. And we'll bring 80 high school students together. We'll actually train them on writing poetry and expressing themselves and using their voice and understanding that that's part of the human experience is expressing yourself and fighting for a better community. Yeah. When that light bulb goes on and a student recognizes, I have this power, I have this voice, and if we can model that adults will listen, that's some of the most beautiful feedback that we get as a system, and it's helped us to grow and change. But you have to create those spaces and you have to be intentional about it.
Yeah, and it also sounds like underneath all of it, it's trust that needs to be built, right? And so I want to dig a little bit deeper and ask you that when adults are in authority over kids, especially those from vulnerable communities or from marginalized communities, how can one build trust with those students who have experienced trauma or experienced lots of people letting them down or not keeping their word? What can we as adults do?
There are things you can do. It starts as simple as listening, caring, meeting people where they are. One of the few silver linings in the pandemic is we did a lot more home visits because kids weren't in school, and that was powerful. That builds trust with families, and that kind of takes off this mantle of you're the school authority when you're in somebody's living room or at least on their porch during the pandemic. Those kind of things, just allowing kids to be themselves and feel like they belong and they don't need to leave part of themselves outside to conform to the expectation of the school. That's really important. The other thing we aspire to in our district is having staff who represent our community. It's really important that students see themselves represented, to have role models, and so that as an organization, we're in tune with our community, and we get away from, the vast majority of the adults in the system look like me when our students have this tremendous diversity. So that's something we're pursuing as well.
So for people who look like you said that that desire to have diversity. What do you say to those individuals who look like you, who don't believe that diversity is important, that don't believe that there is any real value to having a community of people who are of different, who might not agree with everything that you say or do or even look like you? What's kind of your response to those individuals?
Yeah. I try to create on-ramps. Uh, I believe, we have some goers who are really far ahead on this topic we're talking about. But I believe we need to engage most of our staff. There might be some who really struggle to come along, and that's a different conversation. But we have to create on-ramps, and usually that's by appealing to, why are you in education, right?
Mm-hmm.
What do you want for your kids as a parent? Well, we want them to be safe. We want the teacher to believe in them, right? When you really peel all of this kind of, that sometimes the words get in the way, we actually talk about on a human level, what do I want for the kids that I'm responsible for as an educator or for my own children, my two boys? That breaks down a lot of barriers. And most people, when they're maybe initially uncomfortable, I think it's a fear of saying the wrong thing. So we have to create a place that's safe, that if you have positive goodwill and intent in your heart, we're all going to make mistakes. We're all learning. Right. I've learned a lot. I've made a lot of mistakes too. And it needs to be an environment where it's safe, not to stay making mistakes, but to make that mistake and learn and grow and move on. And if we do that, I've seen lots of people who are really nervous about doing things that they weren't familiar with, or maybe meeting somebody where they are culturally, who are some of our strongest. They're like, oh, wow, I get it now. And this is really cool. And we have kids who had potential that they were never reaching until I took some of these steps.
Wow. So even just thinking about your own mistakes, how have you changed as an individual over the last 4 years? We went through this global pandemic. We've come out on the other side. There's been racial unrest, social unrest, etc. How have you kind of made a transformation, or have you, at least in the last 4 years? And do you believe that you're better for it?
Absolutely. To your last question, we've been working to be a great school district for all students. In my mind, since I arrived in Auburn in 2015, there certainly were people working that way previously. I think if you talk to my critics, they would say, maybe it was too slow, it was too invitational, and not enough kind of demand and accountability for, hey, we're doing this. And in the recent years, we've said, gosh, the pandemic really taught us lessons that life is short, and we need to make something of the time that we have now with our students. And we saw the most vulnerable get hurt the most in the pandemic. So it's really not enough to be invitational and support. We need to say, this is what we're doing, and we're all in. And that tone has come across more. And that's I've grown personally, but also as a leader, recognizing I might have the time and I'm comfortable in this process. Our students don't have the time, right? We have a very limited time with our students, and these are formative years, and we need to get better, and we need to hold ourselves to that standard.
Yeah. And students grow up. They eventually become adults, and they always reflect back on their high school years or their middle school years, et cetera, right?
Yeah. And, as a teacher, sometimes those turn out to be good experiences, and you'll hear that. But then there's some things that, I cringe. Gosh, I can't believe I did that, right? I was a high school assistant principal. We suspended kids left and right, and we did it because we thought it was our job to keep order and hold accountability and have a standard. And, you come to realize some of that is necessary. Like when you're talking about safety,
Sure,
you've got to do that. Is that the right way to handle smoking? kid who probably is okay having a day off, versus, how do we think about education, and how do we think about, gosh, maybe kids are, today's vaping, that's because of anxiety, because of a need that we're not meeting. So how do you balance that better? And I think back and think, gosh, there's some things that I've done in the past that I'm glad I know better, and we'll try to do better.
So what advice would you give your former self, maybe even dating back to when you were in high school, which you were in high school at one point?
A long time ago now.
Long time ago. What sort of advice would you give yourself back, of who you used to be?
To be aware that there's a big world out there, and I think in that time I was really determined to be the best I could on my instrument. I played the euphonium. This is like a small tuba. I got to be really good at it because I spent hours working at it, a couple hours a day practicing it, maybe one or two more in ensembles. That focus served me well, but it was at the expense of sometimes connecting with others. And I learned a certain repertoire really well, and didn't have those experiences where I'm interacting with other cultures and just other people who make me better and enrich what I do and help me change and, be the best version of myself.
Wow. My last question for you is, what sort of advice would you give to a student in your school district who might feel a little lost, might feel a little uncertain about their life, of where they currently are? What sort of advice would you give to them on how to become unstuck?
You see that a lot. One of my sons was almost paralyzed applying to college, and he, had a lot going for him. But just, it can be overwhelming to think about life and think about where you fit. I love it when we do assemblies for our freshmen and we bring in students to advise our new freshmen, seniors. What do you wish you had been told? I love it when I hear, get involved, try things. Because what you find out is when you're 13 or 14 and you think, well, I'm a musician, or I'm good at math, or I'm not good at math. No, you're just getting started. Try things. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. You're going to find your fit. And every single student and young person is a gift for this world and has talents to develop. And we don't all find that out, right? I didn't set out to be a superintendent when I was 15, 16, 18 years old, even when I was 25 years old. It's like you grow and you learn where you fit. And each of us, fits in different places and ways. And it takes patience, and there can be a lot of anxiety, especially now with social media. It's very troubling to see people compare themselves, and you're not comparing yourself with others. You're comparing yourself with you and how you fit in this world. And everybody has a place. That's my advice.
That felt like a hug, a virtual hug to those students. I felt that warmth and really appreciate it.
Yeah,
those were beautiful words.
I think we were afraid to do that as educators, and we need to, and the kids need that.
The vulnerability of really opening up, which I think ultimately builds trust and community. Yeah. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you, Quinton.
I would ask you for a violin lesson, but you're kind of a musician, so that feels a little weird to give you a violin lesson.
Well, it'd be fun. I'm game for anything.
You're game for it?
But I was a poor violin student so music education majors.
Yeah.
You take methods, you learn all the instruments, and thank goodness I stuck with the winds in brass and percussion.
All right. So are we doing this or not?
Let's do it.
All right. We're doing it. Okay. All right, I've got to confess, I'm a little nervous about giving Alan a violin lesson, only because he's a musician, or at least has had violin lessons through his method string class in college, and I don't think it went so well. So,
Yeah,
I'm
you're
nervous.
nothing to worry about because I barely passed my violin methods. I'll just say that.
Well, hopefully you pass this class today. All right. So obviously this is a violin. So the first thing is I want you to just get comfortable with the instrument. So the first thing is take your right hand and just tap your left collarbone like this. Great. Can you feel where that is?
Yeah.
Your collarbone? That is exactly where the violin is going to rest. Okay? So I'm just gonna just completely relax and just look at me, and I'm just gonna take this, and then now I just want you to just pop your head, yep, and then we're gonna take this left hand and boom, perfect. Now the thing you'll have to just tell me is, does it feel comfortable? Is it on your shoulder? Do you feel, you look comfortable, but I wanna make sure you're comfortable.
Yes.
Okay, great, fantastic.
We're already doing better than I did 30 years ago.
All right, so the second thing is take your right arm. Can I touch your hand?
Yeah.
Great. Okay, so I want you to just place your right thumb under the fingerboard. Here, great. Yep, and just relax. And now we're just gonna take your index finger and we're just gonna pluck the string. So let's pluck G, D, A, E. Perfect, great. And the thing that I loved immediately was that you didn't like try to pluck it aggressively, but you want to pluck it nice and easy because the sound needs to have sort of a ring. So let's just try that one more time. And I want you to imagine that you're plucking to me. So like your finger is moving kind of towards me, okay?
Do you
So
pluck over the fingerboard or in the gap here?
Yeah, over the fingerboard, which will give you a much rounder sound. Yep, good. Excellent, very good. Okay, so that's just the first thing. When you are learning an instrument, students, they pluck, right? And the plucking of the instrument, you always want it to be resonant, because if it's resonant, then it creates a really beautiful, nice sound, okay? So the second thing is we're gonna take this bow, all right? Now the bow makes 80% of the sound, okay? A lot of people always think that it's the left hand that makes the sound, but it's not. It's the right. So what we're gonna do is I'm just gonna place this here and we're gonna just bend our thumb slightly. Great. And then we're just gonna relax our fingers here and bring these two fingers down. Now I'm gonna just take your finger, completely relax, and we're gonna place it on its tip. And I want a little bit of space here. Great. And then these two middle fingers, just go ahead and place these down. Excellent. And then relax here. Great. You want a nice relaxed arm. And what we're gonna do is we're just gonna draw on the A string, the bow down. So let's just go down. Great, and then up, we're gonna push the bow up. Now what I feel is a lot of tension here. Yeah, so can you just place your hand, your arm, just relax your arm completely in my hand. Give me all of your weight, literally. So like imagine, Alan, if I leaned on you, do you feel all my weight?
Yeah.
That's what I want from you.
Okay.
I want you to give me all of your weight in your right arm. Yeah, there you go, even more. Completely, because if I drop your arm, you see how it falls immediately? That's what I want. Excellent, yes. So the more relaxed you are, the more, and let's just wrap our hands here, great. The more relaxed your arm is, the more beautiful your sound will be. So let's relax here, great. Now, I want your nose to face this, which is called the fingerboard. Excellent, and relax, and just let me draw your arm. Go ahead. There we go, and relax, and I'm gonna just push you up, and down, and up.
So much better.
Yeah, because your arm is relaxed. So the more you can relax your arm, the easier and the more pleasant your sound will be. So now let's go to the D string, and we're gonna relax completely here, and just give me all your weight. Yep, and let me just pull. There we go. So if I pull you back down and up, yeah, and we'll go down one more time. You hear how it just resonated there?
That's nice.
Yeah. So the number one reason why students quit playing an instrument, at least the violin or any string instrument for that reason, is because of that gritty sound. So the way to eliminate that is by having just a completely relaxed arm there. And that's what we really emphasize here at Key to Change, is making sure that violin and viola students are relaxed in their bodies. And when they're relaxed, they can create a sound. Now, the way you're even just holding it right now, you look relaxed. You look like a natural. And a lot of times students look tense, even holding the instrument, and you look like a pro.
All right. Well, when I was tense and it sounded scratchy, I wanted to put this thing down.
Yeah?
And the moment that you had me relax, it sounds so much better.
Yeah.
And I might pick up my son's violin tonight. That's great.
Great, good. Well, I'm glad that we had a chance for you to just experience. Now, one last thing I want to show you is how to hold it. So so we're already holding it in playing position, but let's take our left hand and place it here on the body. And now what we're going to do is we're going to take it away from our face, and we're just going to open up our right arm, and then I just want you to bring it here and open this up, and then boom. That's called rest position.
All right.
And then you can just bring this hand down. He's a pro. There you go.
Thanks, Dr. Morris.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being on the show. I really appreciate it. And thank you for enduring the violin lesson.
I'm up for anything. As you can tell, I was probably better off in the brass section.
Really appreciate you coming and taking the time to chat with me today.
Yeah, thank you, Quinton.
Thank you. And thank you as well for joining us for this episode of Unmute the Voices. I'm Dr. Quinton Morris. Enjoy your day.